Hi, everyone, and welcome to Talks Within the Nine-Sided Circle. I am one of your hosts, Noor Kyle, and I'm airing from Los Angeles right now. And what about you?
I'm your other host. I have you pinned.
Oops.
I have, there we go. Yes, I have her pinned because when we're talking, I prefer looking at her rather than looking at me. I'm not stupid. I am here in the Bay Area in Santa Clara County. And virtually I am back in New Mexico out in the desert away from everybody but the coyotes.
Mm. So today we wanted to discuss emotions, our relationship to them in terms of whether we see them as positive or negative. And our thought is right now that they're neither, you know,
Yeah.
what our relationship to them is such that their positiveness or negativeness is really based on what we do with those feelings, how we act them out. So, yeah.
Yeah. One of the things that Noor discovered and pointed out to me, what was it, just yesterday?
Or a couple, I don't know, maybe 2 nights ago.
Yeah, and absolutely made such total sense to me was the idea that people who are happy all the time tend to be unempathetic. Seems weird, but it is definitely the case according to science. That people who have a constantly, quote, happy demeanor tend to not connect as much with other people's feelings.
Yeah.
And I found that particularly interesting in the case of what we get today from our new agey sort of community, where we're always positive and always up and always happy and always grinning and looking on
Love
the
and
bright side.
light,
Yes,
all that stuff,
all that
which I
stuff.
personally cannot stand, by the way, but that's me and I own that. But yeah, the thing about this is that I think we all have encountered those people who I mean, this is not the only thing that's on the table for discussion, but one thing that we were discussing between Mushtak and I was this idea of toxic positivity, which is when you kind of wallpaper everything with this positivity that isn't necessarily grounded in essence, but is rather grounded in ego, and you feel a need to push that onto others in a way that is disrespectful to their emotional experience. And also, it may be disrespectful to your own, like what's going on underneath that wallpapering that you put up. And I think one thing that's been frustrating people lately when they scroll through Instagram or Facebook or whatever is the sense that people should be being aggressively positive through this experience. And I think it's really difficult to see that when you're having a hard time. What are your thoughts, Mishtak?
I think that that's absolutely correct. And what it seems to me that this does is that it cuts us off from our own experience way too much.
Yeah.
There is, as far as I can tell, that in essence, there is no such thing as a negative emotion. There is only negativity in context.
Yep, I agree.
And so when I think about the teaching of the nine rasas, the nine essences of emotion, right? All of them are meaningful in very important ways, including the ones that seem negative, like disgust. Right? Disgust is an emotion of essence, and if we didn't have it, we would not know not to eat bad stuff. we would not know not to be near certain people. That essential feeling, that essential emotion of disgust is a warning for us. We don't want
Like
to live there.
an instinctive response, you
Yes,
mean?
an instinctive, yeah, like an instinctive response. Sadness is another one, right? Sadness is, um, in context, incredibly important. When I heard about our friend, an elder in the martial arts community, a living encyclopedia of martial arts, being sick with the coronavirus, I was hit with incredible sadness because he's in his 70s. His health is not good. He could die, and we would lose him in not just his knowledge and his skills, but him as a person, which he's an incredible person. And so sadness was the appropriate emotion.
Yeah.
And happiness is also appropriate in context. You don't want to be happy all the time. Trust me on this. You don't want to be happy all the time. Being happy all the time makes all of your happiness meaningless. Does that make sense to you? Do you all get that? It's like
You're
friend,
nodding pretty
our friend
fervently,
Adele.
Shri. What comes up
Yeah.
for you?
Yeah.
I was just reflecting on my other teacher always saying, not good, not bad. Everything that I threw at him, everything I complained about or whatever, to be fully human, you have to be authentic in accepting whatever it is that you're experiencing in that moment. But none of that is permanent. So
No.
you don't worry about it as much but to be able to experience something, and as one friend said, a friend said to me, she said, don't cheer me up. I'm in a shitty mood and I'm going to enjoy it. And I thought, what's this? So she said, like, oh, okay. And I thought, yeah, she's owning that. I'm in a bad mood and I'm going to be in it. So don't cheer me up. I need to feel that. I thought, yeah, that's great. Yeah, it's not bad. Not bad,
Yeah.
not good. It just is that moment.
Yeah.
And it passes. Don't have to hang on to it. It's actually wonderful to be able to feel the spectrum of what we can experience, because you're not a robot.
No. You need to have all of the emotions to be human.
Yeah.
But you need to have them appropriately,
Yeah.
in context, and in proper duration.
My teacher said to me, he said, anger is upon you, but you are not anger.
This is why your teacher is wise.
Yeah. I think it's something to think about for those of us who have had the experience of having to negate emotions that come up for us, or to stuff them down, or to paint them in a different light. I think having that experience of, this is what I feel right now, and this is what I want to embrace right now, like your friend was saying, Shuri, I think that that's really a very healthy stance, especially when it's something that you let flow through you and then it passes and it's like, oh, I'm so glad I had the full experience of that and now I can just let it go.
And that's part of it. My teacher, my Indian teacher, said that the default emotion in talking in these 9 rasas, the default is called shanta, and that's translated as tranquility, calmness, a sense of ease, as it were. And this is where we return. It's like all of the other emotions are trips we take from home. So we take a trip to anger for a while. and we experience that in its appropriate context. And then when we are done using it for whatever we need to use it, we return to our sense of calm. And then we can go and be sad, and then we can return to our sense of calm, and then we can go and be joyful.
Yeah.
Then we can go and be afraid.
And I think we're all experiencing different waves of emotion through this period. I mean, grief washes over us and then it ebbs away. And then we might have a wash of gratitude come over us, and then that fades away. And then sadness might sweep in again. You know, these things just ebb and flow. And I think when we have, I mean, speaking from experience, it can be confusing when you feel a lot of waves come at you in a short period of time. But in periods like this, where day to day we don't always know what to expect, emotions can take us by surprise, news can take us by surprise, that's going to happen. And it's okay to make space for that. We have a question from Mr. King.
Yeah.
Like not getting lost in the emotions, Mr. King? Yeah, okay. So how do we not get lost in the emotions? Do we require some kind of center?
The answer is yes. When we have an emotion, let's say sadness, if I'm experiencing sadness, which is supposedly a negative emotion. So I discover somebody is sick. I feel sad. I say to myself, I am doing sad right now. I literally say that to myself. It's not, I am sad. I do not attribute that experience to my essence. I turn it into a verb. And then I allow myself to experience myself doing sad as fully as I possibly can. I do not block it. And it's like, sad. I'm doing sad. I am experiencing these feelings in my body. I'm saying these words to myself in my mind. And it is sadness. I am doing sadness right now. And when I do that, it becomes, it's terminated. It's like I start doing sad, I finish doing sad. It's like doing the dishes. You start doing the dishes. Maybe you procrastinate before you start doing the dishes if you're me. But you start doing the dishes, then you finish doing the dishes and you're done and the dishes are drying. You start doing sad, you do sad, you feel, and you're done doing sad. And you let the sadness go to where it needs to go. The sadness isn't real. It's not a thing. It's a process that you go through. All emotions are processes that you go through. And if you can make that mental and spiritual switch from the I am this to I am doing this, it is a lifesaver. You've all heard Kyle and I talk about not being the is of identity, but acknowledging the action.
Yeah, Aaron's saying not identifying with the emotion, but experiencing it.
Yes. Not allowing yourself to experience it is toxic. Being stuck in it, identifying with it, and saying that it is you is equally as toxic.
Nancy asks, does it matter if the emotion is very irrational?
Emotions, by definition, are all irrational.
That's not a bad thing, though. I think we put a lot of emphasis in this culture, American culture, Western culture, whatever, intellectual culture where rational is best and everything else is trash. And honestly, I don't think that's the best way to go about things like emotions at all.
No, as a matter of fact, it is a very unhealthy way.
Right.
Rational thought is very important. Emotional thought is equally important.
Okay, here's what actually happened last night.
Tell me what happened.
If you don't mind sharing, yeah, please
Yeah.
do share.
Yeah, I went to the supermarket and they had changed the entrance people could go in, so it was a little less convenient.
Mm-hmm.
Not only was I very angry at having to be inconvenienced, I was enraged at myself for obeying.
Mm-hmm.
I was polite. I obeyed the rules. You know, I don't know if anybody noticed anything, but that was what I was feeling. And I think it was pretty irrational.
Yeah, of course it was irrational. So, did it hurt you to do the different thing?
No,
Okay. Did it help you to do the different thing?
possibly. You know, my life wouldn't have been better if I'd refused to obey them.
Okay. What were you actually experiencing? What were you saying to yourself?
I was saying I'm a piece of shit for obeying.
Okay, according to whom?
I guess some mental habits I've got. I mean, there's no obvious exterior source.
Yeah. Do you think that it's true that you were a piece of shit for obeying? Is there any
No,
objective truth to that?
no.
What was the actual feeling without the words?
Like in the body?
Yeah,
Like in the body or
again,
the mind?
I'm trying to remember. I understood the question.
Mm-hmm.
I would say energy coming up, shoulders coming in, probably. Possibly, and it was not felt as a gesture at the time, but like wanting to go like this.
Okay. So were you angry or were you frustrated or both?
Interesting distinction.
Yeah.
Probably both.
Okay. Frustration usually happens when you are being either stopped from doing something or forced to do something.
Mm-hmm.
So where does that fit in? What were you being forced to do?
Well, it was kind of both. I couldn't go in the door I normally use, and I was forced to go to a different door.
Okay. How long did you experience this emotion or these emotions?
Probably some small number of minutes.
Okay. But then the emotion went away?
No, there was various assorted anger a lot that night.
Okay, so you went back and relived the experience a bunch.
Enough to remember it, but no, it was like all this different stuff.
Mm-hmm. That's the impression I'm getting, is
Yeah.
that it's just things piling up together into one big thing.
But they're all somehow attached to this one experience, right?
Mm-hmm.
Roughly around the same time, I think I was fairly pissed off going to the store before this happened.
Okay. So one thing we noticed is that your behavior was still appropriate.
Yeah.
And so you got to pat yourself on the back for that. Because it's one thing to feel an emotion, it's another thing to act that emotion out.
Yeah.
And we see that. We see people do stupid, irrational shit every day now, throwing temper tantrums. I mean, I feel those things myself. I mean, there are a couple of busy roads. They're not as busy now, but that's in some ways kind of a detriment. And we have people who want to do sideshows on these roads. You
What
all
are
know what a
sideshows
sideshow
again?
is.
Yeah, I mean, you might want to explain that.
That's where people get out and they spin their cars around and they burn a lot of rubber and they make a lot of noise, and it's somehow considered to be a cool thing. It was worse in Oakland, but it still happens here. And every time I hear it, I get angry. I feel myself doing some serious anger at these people. I don't act on it because there's nothing that I can reasonably do to stop them. I can't go out and shoot at their cars.
Hmm.
And if I called the police, by the time the police got here, they'd be gone anyway.
Yeah. Aaron says sideshows happen daily on his street, so he relates, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we have some other stuff too that
Yeah.
I don't want to lose track of.
I just want to make sure that Nancy
Yeah.
gets to share
Yep.
what she needs to share.
Yeah, I mean, my tentative theory at this point, and then I was very knocked out this morning, and I felt like, what's wrong with me? I'm so knocked out. I'm depressed. I can't do anything.
Mm,
And I think at least some of it was being sick, and I just didn't realize it.
Probably
that can
so.
happen. Yeah. I mean, for me, I notice, I mean, this is going to be different for everyone, but in my personal case, like when my hormones are shifting throughout my menstrual cycle, I'll sit there and think, why am I so upset right now? Why am I doing upsetness right now, right? And often it's because I'm in a hormonal state where my fuse is just a little bit shorter. I'm a little bit more tender emotionally, like the veils are just thinner. And so sometimes that's the explanation for why I'm feeling more amped up than I normally do. And that can happen with sickness as well.
So let's look at these other things here.
Yeah. So Aaron asked, what are some states of mind that get mistaken for being emotional?
I'm not quite sure how to answer that. What do you think?
Yeah,
Nancy
I don't know.
touched on one, being sick.
Yeah. And I think we have to be careful about using the term emotional, because I feel like that can be used in pejorative ways, and I'm sure that's not what you mean, but if you feel like clarifying, Aaron, go for it. That'd be awesome. Adele, she's talking about the fact that we do emotion rather than our emotion.
Mm-hmm.
She says, similar to the way I learned how to care for a loved one living with mental illness, you view them as a person first, not as the illness.
Exactly right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Cherie says, is this monkey mind being mischievous? I think that's like...
Often.
Yeah.
One of the things that we have to remember about our emotions is that they are frequently mechanical. They're stimulus response. Something pokes you in a particular way and an emotion comes up. That's like I'm listening to a beautiful piece of music and I feel like emotion welling up and being slightly sad if it's sad music, or happy if it's happy music. That's all mechanical. That's okay. There is nothing wrong with that. The monkey mind can get mischievous, and when it does, it will play for you these emotions over and over again until you convince it that it needs to stop.
Nancy says, our standards for emotions are also emotionally based.
Yep. Yeah, think about 19th century British people.
Stiff upper lip.
Yep.
All that stuff.
Lay back and think of England.
Mm. Yeah, I think also of the fact that, at least in American culture, men are often shamed. You know, boys and men are often shamed for being tenderhearted and things like that. So they get pushed in the direction of expressing complex emotions through the default of anger a lot of the time.
Yep.
Yeah.
I used to run across that so often when somebody would say, I want to know what you're feeling. I want to know what you're feeling. I want to know what you're feeling. And then you tell them what you're feeling, and that's not appropriate.
Mm.
That's not the right feeling.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What would be an example of that you've witnessed?
That I've witnessed?
Yeah.
Um,
Or that you've experienced, even if you feel comfortable sharing that.
I think I'm going to pass on that because
Yeah.
some of that is still a little raw for me, even after all these years.
Yeah, and I think that just goes to show that we're all wrapped up in that experience of being shamed for various emotional responses. So
Yep.
thank you for sharing just that much, because I think that's a legitimate response.
Yeah,
I mean,
people don't want to know what you're actually feeling.
Yeah.
They want you to feel what they think is appropriate.
Right, and when I say legitimate, I mean I want to validate that experience, not add
I
judgment
can
to
give
it.
you one example.
Sure.
A past relationship. She loved to go to the beach, and I'm not a beach person. Look behind me. That's where I grew up, right? This is what I'm used to. This is the kind of landscape that I'm really comfortable in.
Ain't no beaches in
Ain't
New
no
Mexico.
beaches. I was never in water deeper than my knees until I was like 14 or 15. Consequently, the beach is not my favorite place. I don't hate it, but you know, it's like on my list of things that I like to do. It's not really. It's down about 7 or 8. But she loved the beach, and so she's always, let's go to the beach, and of course it's only fair, you know, because I do the things that I like and she did them with me. I would go to the beach with her.
Yeah.
But she wanted me to enjoy being at the beach. She wanted me to feel the happiness of being at the beach that she felt, and it's like, I'm never going to do that. I'll go to the beach. I'll sit here. I'll watch the water. I'll read a book. I'll do all of these things. But I'm never going to love it like you do, because I didn't grow up next to the damn thing. And that was never good enough. It's like, I want you to love the beach. And
Can't force it.
yeah, can't do it.
Nope. So yeah,
Yeah, so that's an example of you're only allowed to feel what somebody thinks you should feel.
Yeah, and I think this kind of touches on Nancy's last remark, which was, you know, are we having the quote unquote right responses to art? Like, what the fuck does that even mean, really? So
yeah, my response to art is I either like it or I don't like it. Those are the only two responses I have. I can give you all of the reasons I like something or all of the reasons I don't like something. It's like you know, in San Francisco they have the Legion of Honor, which is this beautiful museum that has rooms full of the Dutch masters. They have probably 50 Rembrandts, and my fave, they have Rodins. They have so many Rodins, and they have his girlfriend's work as well, whose name I am Camille Claudel. who was as good a sculptor as he was. And I have spent all day just sitting with those sculptures, allowing myself to enjoy and appreciate them. And I could tell you why. I could break it down for you. I could talk about the lines, the light and shadow, the different angles that evoke all of these different feelings. But for me, it's just, wow, this is so good. So that's my idea of appreciating art.
Yeah.
You know, one way of looking at emotions that I've found to be interesting and useful sometimes is to see them in many ways analogous to our sense perceptions. They're channels of information. They're kind of like sight and sound and hearing, you know. And that often what's happening is that there's information that's being transmitted, and part of the thing is to find out what that information really is, you know. Now that's obviously a incomplete metaphor, you know, and I mean, sometimes I would have a hard time saying, well, what exactly is the information that's being transmitted? But very often, like fear, for example, you know, transmits presumably information of potential danger, you know, sadness of a loss or a coming loss, maybe, and so forth. And one of the things I find quite useful myself is, especially in this time, you know, where at least for me, there's a sort of almost continuing kind of dread almost going on.
Mhm.
But what this was bringing up for me is very much, you know, if I look into that, is essentially re-stimulating a lot of the stuff I had as a kid during the war, you know.
Right, I can imagine.
And
Yeah.
looking at that and examining that has been for me really quite useful, you know. And so I think there's something to be said for this metaphor of emotions as being another channel of information, just as sight and hearing are, you know.
And I think you're absolutely correct about that. I mean, even the idea of emotional intelligence, which is new for us for some reason in the West, it relates to that. It's
Yeah.
like Noor has an incredibly high level of emotional intelligence, much higher than mine. I am often amazed at the information that she can glean from her emotional experience. It's rich, it's textured, it's intelligent, and it provides her with wonderful information about her world and the people in it.
Specifically, if I give time to it.
Yeah.
I mean, if I don't, then I lose all that information.
Noor, can you give us an example of something like that? Because you know, that would be a beautiful illustration of this information as emotion as an information channel. You know.
Again, I have to think of something that's less charged for me,
All
you know. So,
Sure. Obviously, this is an area that's not exactly an uncharged area to be dealing with.
Oh yeah, I mean, we knew talking about this today that we're waiting in what we're discussing, you know, and I knew that would be true for all of us.
Mm-hmm.
So I went into this knowing that there's a certain level of tenderness to this discussion, and I think for me personally, it was this sense of like, I mean, I have a very, as Mushtak was saying, when I have an emotional experience, it usually does have like a shape and a texture to it. And I can use an example of something I'm going through right now, which I feel okay talking about right now. But I was feeling this experience of being spread thin. And I was feeling like I work, I'm home. Why the hell am I having this experience right now? And I realized it's because I'm not, I literally had to take that verbal metaphor of being spread thin and think about, okay, what exactly might that look like in the real world? And I realized it was because I was giving my emotional energy to others instead of myself. And because I wasn't in tune with myself, I was totally oblivious that I was doing that. But when I looked into the metaphor that I was putting into that emotional experience, that was a clue to me about how to dig a little bit deeper and try to resolve that tension that I was feeling. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense to me. And one of the things I like about that is that, I mean, partly because it jives with my own experience, is that if I view it as an information source, usually it's not like a clear message that's just coming through saying, oh, you know, there's a tiger about to attack you.
Right,
I mean, those are, but rather it needs to be almost uncovered in some of the way that you were describing, you know, looking at the metaphor of what you're saying to yourself and so forth to uncover what is that's really being pointed at underneath. But what's being pointed at underneath is some legitimate piece of information, which is presumably quite useful, as you found out in your case. You know.
Yeah.
I found that be true also.
And I feel I have the privilege of having that language verbally to illustrate my emotional experience, and not everyone is going to have that. And I think that can add to the challenge of figuring out what's going on in the body in terms of like, where is this discomfort in my body? Am I feeling it in my chest? What kind of shape does it have? All that stuff. Like, if you haven't exercised that practice, it feels like, I don't know, I just feel stressed. I don't know why I feel stressed. I'm just pissed off. I don't know.
And it requires, if I understand what you're saying, it requires this ability to sort of step back a little bit and pause and not just completely react to that emotion, but allow it to unfold. And that,
right. Yes. And that was how I knew that was part of what was missing my past few days, was the fact that I was not making space to investigate like that. Mm-hmm. So I was just like, I don't know, I feel pissed off and I feel constricted, like, but what's underneath that? What's really going on? Yeah.
May I
you want to say,
interject?
Yeah, please.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And I'm gonna share a little bit more vulnerably right now. I grew up not expressing my emotions. I Filipino mother, so Asian moms is a thing where they are in survival mode if they come from another country, and then my father was a Vietnam vet, or my stepdad was a Vietnam vet, and had PTSD. So I was in a situation where I was getting a lot of verbal abuse, but as an adult, I can see past that and see the human. And the problem was I didn't have anyone to talk to, as I was as an only child. I had nobody to communicate what was happening to me. So what I did was shut up. I closed my mouth for years. And I also started thinking all these feelings of being like told not to speak and not to do this and getting yelled at, those got layered into my brain. And I would react and hold things in and then blow up. And I also started feeling really unintelligent. And it's very interesting, you know, I started learning about emotions when I studied acting with Burt Reynolds a few years back, but it wasn't until I lost my real dad 1 year ago, February 25th, that I started writing. And Ilmar, you mentioned emotional information. I found this journal, and basically, I guess in writing about my grief, I found many very eloquent passages about the layers and layers and layers of emotional information starting to unravel. And I mean, I think as an adult and having like delved into acting and in the emotions of these other characters versus myself, I started to understand why a character would have an emotional reaction as a, like, what's the cause of that? And then I had to apply it to myself. So a lot of the things that we react to in this like current, like whatever's happening in our day to day, our our friends say something to you and you like take it out of proportion. For me, it comes from a place from my childhood. So I think that there's always root causes, and so these are really important pieces of information that have play into who you are as an adult.
Yeah, I certainly agree with that. I mean, and I also find, as you mentioned, that something like journaling or trying to put it into words, even though we know the words are not the emotion, they're just the pointers. But there's something about trying to articulate these things that I think begins to clarify, either by ourselves in a journal or in a safe group environment, And I think there's a great deal of value in that and coming to understand what it is that's being conveyed. So yeah,
for those of us who work with other people, that becomes very important too. My teacher in therapy said, when you are working with somebody and they're having an emotional experience, you want to know enough about that emotion that you could do that emotion exactly the same way that they do. And only then can you really work with it. Only then do you really have the empathy. And I've always taken that to heart. And those of you who've worked with me know that I will ask you questions about your emotions that seem very, very strange sometimes. And it's because I'm trying to build a model of how you're doing what you're doing so I could do it too, so I can feel what you're feeling and then figure out a way out of it.
Yeah, I mean, the difference between, as someone who offers care, you have to be able to do empathy, but with the ability to hold a container. That's what compassion is. You're not incapacitated by the empathy that you're experiencing. And yet, you do need to be able to connect with that emotion in order to hold space for it.
Yeah. Nancy had another.
Yeah, she mentioned that she sees a lot of emotional policing online, especially around politics.
Yeah, and I would suggest that if you look, you'll see that the emotional policing is everywhere. It's more apparent online because it's more blatant.
Yeah.
But every family does emotional policing. Every group does emotional policing, intentionally or unconsciously. In every group, this is why we have terms like negative and positive emotions.
Mm-hmm.
I want to touch on this again. There is no such thing as a negative emotion. There is only negative use of an emotion. And the negative use of emotion is using that emotion to hurt yourself or somebody else. And you can do that just as well with happiness as you can with sadness.
Yep, definitely. Yep.
Y'all get that, right? If Nora's feeling sad and she comes to me and she says, I'm feeling kind of sad right now. And I look at her, I say, don't worry, be happy. That's not going to help her. That is not helping. That's a Dale just punched me in the head there. Yeah, that is using what we would think of happiness as a positive emotion, but that's using it to hurt another person. Because when you hear that, that hurts. If I say to her, don't worry, be happy, that's like I'm negating her experience, which, trust me, sucks, whatever her experience is.
Yeah.
And just because I'm doing it with happy, cheery, happy, joy feelings, doesn't mean that they aren't incredibly hurtful. So we all do emotional policing. Every group does. Every group has a list of things that are appropriate to feel and things that are inappropriate to feel. Think about those classic martial arts movies where some kid breaks down into tears and the teacher comes up and says, "There's no crying in martial arts."
Yeah.
Yeah, if your teacher cannot deal with your students' emotions, um, you might need to find a new one.
Yeah, I agree. Gross. Aaron says, just like putting fixations on a positive, negative spectrum.
Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I've had this conversation with people before about trauma. Like, people talk about degrees of trauma and all that stuff. But the fact is, in your personal subjective experience, every trauma is traumatic. It's not on a spectrum. Like, it's going to mess you up. Like, I've had to have discussions about, you know, racial stuff, economic stuff, but individually, I mean, you still have to unpack that stuff. It's still going to have impact on your behavior. It's going to have impact on how you think about yourself and others. So yeah, we could put stuff on a spectrum, and I don't know, for policy reasons, there are reasons why that might be useful. But when we talk about the impact we have on each other, when you put things on a spectrum, it becomes problematic. And that's hard for us to think about because, you know, we want our experience validated, and that's always important. But the fact is that goes for everyone.
I just want to say I agree with you, Noor. I recently exited a relationship with a gentleman that has PTSD from the Philippine army, and I and I didn't really put two and two together about my own growing up with a Vietnam vet. I really didn't think that I might have a little bit of PTSD myself until conflict arose in this relationship, and I didn't have any space held, and I felt like the love was really real, but love isn't enough, and space wasn't held, and I felt like he knew that I was going through grief. I had lost my dad, and there was no understanding. And it's just like, it's not a spectrum. I didn't actually say it, hey, this isn't, like a comparison game, like you're suffering more than I am because of the scale of what you've seen and witnessed and partaken in. But I do have something that's making me react in certain ways, and I could use some understanding.
And
So
yeah, sometimes we can't get that space held by the people we would love to have hold it for us, and that's the really sad part.
yeah, and when it comes to love, Zoha is here late. But when it comes to love, here's something that I know for a fact about love. Absolutely, it is the baseline truth of love. Love is behavior. Love is not just a feeling. Love is not just an emotion. I mean, every guy who goes out and beats the crap out of his wife tells her that he loves her the next day. So sometimes that's hard for people to hear because they want to think, oh, my loving somebody will make it all better. But love is behavior. And that's the bottom line on that one.
It's a hard truth sometimes. Yeah.
And that's one of the things. Salam Zoha.
I don't know if she's fully connected yet.
Yeah.
Does anyone else have thoughts or feelings they'd like to share?
I've got one more,
Go for it.
which is that what I've been noticing lately is that people don't just love their particular emotions, they love their emotional habits.
Yes, and that's because most emotions are habits. A habit, by the way, is a single unit of behavior. So I used to use the example of smoking, because smoking is a total habit. When you you get the trigger urge to smoke a cigarette, the point that you reach for your cigarettes, you take the cigarette out of the package, you grab your lighter, you put it in your mouth, you light it up, you take the first drag, that's one habit. And I know that this is a habit because of this thing called pattern interruption. One of the ways that I used to work with people who were smokers who I need to help quit smoking was that, you know, I was a hypnotherapist. That was part of my practice. So they would start that process and I would just reach out just before the fire hit their cigarette and snatch it out of their mouth. And then I would start talking to them while they were trying to process what happened, and boom, into a deep trance, because they were already into the trance from the habit. I just took the trance over. And all emotions tend to be that. So you have to find that trigger point where the emotion is just starting. It's really hard to get somebody out of a habitual emotion when they're in the middle of it. It's much, much easier to get yourself out of it when it first starts. This is something that Alfred Korzybski called the cortical thalamatic pause. It's where you take that breath as the emotion is coming up and you just observe it. You don't try and stop the emotion. You just observe it and not act upon it. Because usually when it's a habit, it demands action. And if you can just observe the emotion as it comes up, you don't have to be at the effect of it. You can break the habit and still feel the feeling.
I think I'm talking about a somewhat different thing, which is that, for example, I'm strongly attached to the idea of being calm and reasonable.
I know that feel.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, you know, I deal with people online whose habit is explosive anger. And of course, why can't they be more like me? They probably feel, why can't I be more like them? And, you know, I'm trying to get a little distance on the thing.
Yeah, well, that again is still habit. You have a habit of being calm and reasonable.
Exactly.
Yeah, so you don't have to be. When I was working on psychiatric units, I noticed that the patients had a tendency to have a great control over the environment because they would use reasonability against the staff. They would present to the staff things that they wanted to do that were reasonable according to culture and everything, even though they were totally inappropriate. And
Like what?
oh, like the usual, we'll go back to cigarettes because crazy people love to smoke cigarettes. At least they did back in my day, which was admittedly, I got out of that business in the late 1970s. The moment I graduated from graduate school, it was like, I was done.
Yeah.
But so you have a rule that says no smoking after 10 o'clock at night on the ward. And somebody wants a cigarette at 11 o'clock. And you say, no, you can't have a cigarette now. And they will give you all of the reasons why it would be really good for them to have a cigarette, good for their mental health, and so that they can relax and sleep. And, you know, you would feel them trying to put you in a double bind. Everybody here has been in a double bind, so they know what it feels like. Y'all know what it feels like when you don't want to do this and you don't want to do that. And here you are and you're feeling this tension. And one day, about a year, it took me about a year to figure this out, but I was really young. So I have that as an excuse. I realized that this was going on, and there was no reason that I had to be reasonable. And with that one thought, I was able to like take control over my unit in ways that most of the staff there couldn't do.
So what did that look like in practice?
That looked like you come up and say, I want a cigarette. And I say, no. And you say, but, and I say, I don't care. I don't have to be reasonable. Your reasons don't mean anything to me. Go back to your room. You don't get a cigarette. You do not get to pass go. And they would be shocked because I didn't play their game. Sometimes I would have to give them things like, cigarettes are a tool of the devil. Go away.
So what might that look like online, though? I'm just trying to think of a way to...
Well, think of the interactions I've had with people recently around, think Bernie Bros. You know, I had that one Bernie bro try and give me all of the reasons why the conversation should switch to why Bernie Sanders was the right candidate as opposed to why Bernie bros had such bad behavior. You remember that?
Vaguely.
Yeah, and my reaction was, you're in my house. Shut up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I do recall that. And I think that's, you know, sometimes it needs to be said, you know,
Yeah.
This is my Facebook wall. I don't need to have this debate with you. Like, you're not entitled to a debate with me.
Yeah, and that was basically it. You cannot present a rational argument, therefore, I do not need to listen to you. Go away, come back when you can actually make an argument for this, or address what I actually said. Don't try and hijack my thread.
Yeah. Aaron says, I like to say my piece and not get manipulated into saying more than I intend to.
That's always a good thing. But just remember, there is a certain kind of person that will use your good manners against you. So, this is what we got going today. Has this been at all useful? Have we given you any ideas on how you might be able to process emotions in a way that will not get you trapped in them? You know that one thing that I will tell you is, first, do your breath practice.
Yeah.
It always goes back to that. If you don't have a breath practice, ask for one. If you do have a breath practice, why aren't you doing it? Why aren't you doing it right now?
Especially because we're dealing with such an influx of uncertainty. This is a great time to do the breath practice, because it adds that foundation from which you can have the experience of witnessing the dialogue you're having with yourself, like Ilmar and I were talking about. It's things like that that give you the space to see what's happening with you emotionally. And sometimes you see, oh, you know, my blood sugar's low, I should go eat a sandwich. And then that solves the problem. All right. Nancy says she thinks that this is helpful, and she's thinking about how emotional policing that she grew up with a lot of is still affecting her. Absolutely, Nancy. I mean, I would say that's the case, especially if you feel this, you know, that the way to get by is to be perfectly reasonable and rational, and to be really set on holding that, you know, that structure inside yourself in such a way that it's like, that's the key. You're not allowed to have irrational feelings or thoughts and all that stuff. That can be a trap in and of itself. It's not fair to you.
Cherie says, you have a
Cherie
choice.
says, you have a choice with what you choose and value to feel. That is powerful for me, she says.
Yep.
Yeah.
It's about what people are trying to impose on you is that you have a choice whether you believe it or not. And if you don't believe it, don't believe it. So you can hold yourself, your own container. So if I value myself and someone's telling me how bad I am, and I am actually the cause of all this coronavirus in Sydney, do I choose to believe that? No.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
what I think about that person is my business and not that person's business. So I don't have to let people upset my own equanimity. I have a choice. I can choose to be upset because I felt like indulging that or not. But if I, you know, gather every story that I have in my past and keep dredging it up, I will be a mess. So I don't choose to go down that path anymore, because that was just my mind creating the story. Oh, look, it's just a story. It's just another story. You know, I've processed that. Why am I going back there? You know, so it's a choice. But the thing that triggers me is my partner. If he says and does something, if I've done enough breath practice, I have enough presence to think, whoa, where's that coming from? And I change my tone and I see if I can lead him just to consider something else and not dive into the upset. So if I have to change a pattern or anything, I like that. I like that idea, to change someone's habit pattern of doing a certain thing and just gently remind him that this could be this or that. And that gives him a new way of looking at something. Something happened yesterday with a friend, and she snapped at me yesterday, and I thought, ooh, that's not about me. She's going through something. And at the end of the day, I saw her and I gave her some dinner. And I said, would you like some dinner? And she was so happy. And she sent me a lovely message this morning to say how she appreciated that so much, but that empathy of feeling, that's not an upset about me. She's feeling upset about something. And can I change that? Possibly, possibly not. But to be able to just not think about trying to create, I'm a good person, blah, 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 you shouldn't speak to me like that. Just do something. Just be generous, be kind, be uncommonly generous with your emotion, your feeling, and say, okay, that's you, not me. The end.
Yeah.
That was the most powerful thing that my teacher told me. Whenever I started going off something, then he'd go, the end. The end. Oh, okay.
Yep.
It's a very
that brings up something very important, which is choice. Emotional people who do emotional manipulation, the way they do it is that they limit your choices. If I was to say to Noor, okay, Noor, you can feel this way or you can feel that way. You pick. You see what I just did? Right? This is not good, because there may be many more choices than that. It's just I want her to pick one of those two.
Yeah.
That's like if I said, Noor, would you like to wash the dishes now or in a half an hour? Right? That's totally manipulative.
I mean, it's a strategy commonly used by people who are in domestic situations, but I mean, yeah, I think it's so hard for us to have the foundation from which we can give people the space they need to have authentic washes of emotion. And when we understand that their experience is not about us at the heart of it, it's easier for us to allow that to just be what it is.
Yeah. So when it comes to emotion, groups that do emotional policing, listen to the choices that you're offered and figure out what choices are being denied you.
Mm-hmm.
And that will tell you a lot about the group or the person. What you want to do is find groups that pretty much allow you to have whatever experience that you have.
Yeah.
Now, doesn't mean that you get to act out negative behaviors. You know, home, we don't play those games, but you're allowed to feel everything that you feel. Feel angry, be angry. Don't pick up shit and throw it against the wall, but be angry. Express it. I'm angry. Then somebody can go, what are you angry about? And then you might go, I don't know. Could happen. So one thing that one of my teachers gave me is make sure that you always have 3 choices at least. Not 1, not 2, but 3. If you have only 1 choice, you're a robot. 2 choices, you're a more clever robot. It's only with 3 choices that you begin to actually be a free human being.
Yep.
Yep. I did not come from the hollowed temples on the high mountains. I came from other places.
Yeah, he did. Ilmar, do you have a thought?
Yeah, well, I have a curiosity. You know, I'm wondering about the other direction of this flow. When is it ever appropriate to induce an emotion in somebody else? I mean, we've been talking a lot about our experiences of emotions, and
I do that in my work all the time.
Right, and so speak to that. I mean, in under what circumstances is it appropriate to induce an emotion in somebody?
I will oftentimes induce a particular emotion when they need that emotion to counteract something that they already had, or when I need to introduce some part of them to some other part of them that is not connected up.
Mm-hmm.
But it's never you never force somebody to do that. You just invite them. You know, if I say, Ilmar, I wonder if you can remember a time when you felt really safe. You know, I'm inducing a sense of safety in you by asking that question, but you might go, no, I can't remember that. And I left that open.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a difference between, I want you to think of a time when you were really safe. Imagine what it was like, as opposed to, can you do this?
Mm-hmm.
So it's switch. Linguistically, that's the difference between the modal operator of possibility and the modal operator of necessity.
Mm-hmm.
So it is in most cases unethical to use the modal operator of necessity on people unless you absolutely have to for their own safety. But you can use the modal operator of possibility to induce any emotion that you think will benefit them. And you have to be willing for them to say no.
And you have to be able to take responsibility for that emotion that you do induce in that person. Yeah.
Yes.
But on the current political scene, obviously there's a serious attempt to induce almost fear about the coronavirus, right?
Yes.
As a way of motivating us to maintain social distance and all that other stuff, you know.
Mm-hmm. And for a number of other political goals.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
And sometimes it seems appropriate, and sometimes it seems inappropriate,
Yeah.
right? You know, and presumably the difference is, you know, whether it's in fact doing some good. Eh? I mean,
Yeah, and whether you're being invited or insisted.
right.
That's an important distinction.
I mean, so I do a lot of work with men's groups and stuff, and they're obviously, we are often, as very early in the conversation tonight, we were mentioning, men in general, have repressed feelings and so forth, and trying to open that up very often involves in suggesting people get more deeply into whatever emotions they are feeling.
Yeah, you notice the magic word though there, suggesting.
Right.
I think there can be an emotional backlash when you generally, not you specifically, obviously, try to force that. Like, people just pull back even more sometimes. Right. It just feels oppressive and weird. Like it becomes like a mandate or like a pressure from the outside. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so looking, go ahead. No, I was sort of thinking back to this model of emotions as being channels for information. Sometimes, you don't want to force a particular piece of information on somebody. It's almost like showing them a picture which is going to devastate them or something of that sort. So yeah. So I'm just mumbling here. I agree with what you were saying. It's an invitation rather than a forcing.
Yeah, as Aaron says, when it's not an option, when it's not an invitation rather than an obligation, it feels invasive. It becomes invasive. Yeah. So that's something every facilitator needs to think about too.
Yep. So we have come to the end of our time yet again. We've gone over time, as we often do for some reason. One of us might be a little bit overly wordy sometimes. I don't know.
But I think that especially in a global situation like this, maybe we need this space. I mean, it definitely makes me feel good to see familiar faces every Sunday. And
oh, hell yeah.
It's comforting and reassuring, and I just want to express that I really value that.
Yeah, this is something I think both Noor and I really look forward to each week, is to be able to hang out with you guys and talk about weird stuff and delve deeply into this.
Aaron says same here. Thanks, Aaron. Yeah. So we don't want to keep you any longer. It is coming up on an hour and a half, but thanks so much for being here and for sharing your thoughts with us, because I think that helps a lot in discussions like this. Yeah.
And this is an important topic right now. For our own, everybody's mental and emotional health, we need to really give thought to this and how we can handle this and how we can support each other through it, which is equally important.
Yep.
All of you guys are support systems to me. Cherie brought this out the other day, asking me what I was grateful for, or I forget your exact words, but it immediately came up. It's like my students, the people who I work with. I am incredibly grateful to all of you, because you're all really good. You're good students. You think, you learn things. I love it. Makes me happy. Don't let it go to your heads, but it makes me happy.
I think it was about asking you what brings you joy.
Yes, that's what it was. Yes. And working with all of you guys brings me a lot of joy.
Me too.
Yeah, didn't even have to think about that one. All right, so with no further ado, we are going to end the recording and say goodbye to everybody who's watching this on the recording.
Yeah. Thanks for
Farewell.
watching. Yeah.
Good night and thank you.